Good evening, everybody. Welcome back.
Good evening.
A very fast 15 minutes. Consciousness is growing already. So the first class we talked about a lot of things that we need to empty out in order to make room for a spiritual consciousness or mystical consciousness, same thing. And then last week we sort of set the groundwork so that we would know what was mystical and what was mental and what was material and what things fell into those various areas. And that's all of our groundwork. And so tonight we can start doing some work in mystical truth. Everything that I say tonight is stuff that I have realized as a result of studying Joel Goldsmith, who was an amazingly good teacher, and I've studied Joel for 28 years and also have spent time with many of his students and been exposed to their consciousness. And of course that's very much tempered by my experience with Rashneesh, who was my true love, my first guru in true love, and then most of all by Robert Adams, who I spent 7 years with, and in his consciousness. And it's interesting that Robert is pure consciousness, and Joel and Rajneesh is pure love, and Joel is a teacher. In any event, whatever we talk about in the next several classes is what I've realized as a result of the time spent with all of them, and it's absolutely consistent with everything that Joel taught. A lot of people, and I too originally, have trouble with Joel because his classes were primarily composed of the students of the current metaphysical thought back in the 1950s and 60s, a very Christian metaphysical crowd, because nobody else could hear him. The Orthodox churches couldn't hear him, and the non-Orthodox couldn't hear him. So there's a lot of Christian terminology. And the other thing is that Joel uses the archaic form of he used an old Bible, so there's a lot of these and thous and thys and things like that, which don't speak to me. And the other thing is that Joel uses the Bible as an authority. And I didn't recognize the Bible as an authority. I had no idea what parts of the Bible were authoritative and what weren't, if any were. A lot of the Old Testament clearly isn't. And I subsequently realized that the only parts of the Bible that Joel talks about are parts that had their meaning revealed to him spiritually, and so they were authority to him, but that did not make them authority to me. And so I had difficulty with his terminology and his authorities and all sorts of things, and yet that which is at the center of me was very clear from the very first book I read that he was speaking truth and that he was an important teacher for me. So we're going to teach the same truth, or talk about the same truth which he taught, but I'm going to make the attempt to not use any loaded terms, any terms that we all have meanings for, because we will all have different meanings for them. I don't want to use terms that we've got conditioned meanings for. I'm going to try not to use loaded terms. And I'm not going to call on any authorities. I'm going to as I've just begun, cite where I got my understanding, and I will often mention lots of people, but there's no reason for you to assume that any of them are authorities. There's one authority, and it's right here in the center of you, and if you're able to empty out your intellect and just hear what's said, that which is at the center of you will tell you whether this is truth for you now or not. And if it isn't your truth now, that doesn't say anything about you or the truth. It says something about the juxtaposition in this moment. So that's what we're going to try to do. The mystical truth, which everybody is reaching for now, has been known, revealed for consistently over and over and over again for over 5,000 years. So it's not a secret. It's never been recognized by the churches, but it's been revealed forever. In India, there was a group of people called the Rishis, which means sages, who produced a work called the Vedanta, the Vedas. And this was 5,000 years ago. These were independent people who each had the mystical experience themselves and orally talked about it. And the tradition was handed down orally. And that's the truth we're going to talk about, the truth that they discovered. Subsequently, another group of people in the same area wrote some things called the Upanishads, which are very short, clear truths. There may be 8 or 10 of them that are very clear and short and concise and express the same truth. And these, again, were written by 8 or 10 different people at different times, and yet they're absolutely consistent. And shortly thereafter, Gautama the Buddha, while sitting under the Bodhi tree, woke up. Those are his words. He said, "I am awake. Not I'm enlightened, not I saw God, just I am awake." And he then taught for 50 years, and his truth was the same truth. And Moses had the revelation that I am that I am, and was expressing the same truth, as did a number of the Old Testament prophets, as did Krishna, whoever Krishna was in the Bhagavad Gita of Christ, before Christ was here. Krishna and Christ are the same word, by the way. They come from the same root, and they both mean that experience, not that person. Krishna was the experience. The guy's name might have been Pete, although that's not a very good Sanskrit name. And Christ was an experience. The guy's name that we know about that had it was Jesus. Buddha is an experience. The guy who had it was Gautama. In any event, Jesus then had the same experience and talked about it, consistent with all these other teachers. Rumi, Arabian poet of, I don't know, maybe 13 or 1400, had the same experience and wrote enough poetry to reach from the floor to the peak of the ceiling here. And Kabir, and it's describing the same experience again, and Kabir had the same experience and wrote ecstatic poetry. And there's books full, one over there, of mystical poetry from England and Europe. You know, every century more people had the experience. And all the same experience. You can read any of these sources and see for yourself what they're saying and examine for yourself whether or not there's a consistent experience here which talks to you. There was a wonderful thing written called the Ashtavakra Gita, written by somebody we don't know who it is, which is the most wonderful poetic statement of the same truth. And in our current age, there was Ramana Maharshi and Ramakrishna and Nisargadatta Maharaj and Neem Karoli Baba and Anandamayi Ma and on, the great sages of India, who all share the same experience. And of course it was consistent with what Rajneesh taught, and it's consistent with what Joel taught, and Joel finally had that complete experience before he left us in 1964. And it's absolutely consistent with what Robert taught for over 50 years. So those are all sources that are available to you, and I will cite those as my authority and your potential authority. You can go look yourself and see what you find there. And what they all said, and I'm going to say it in the simplest way, which is the way of the high Indian teaching called Advaita, which means non-dual. The highest teaching, the simplest teaching, is all there is God. Sounds a lot like a statement in the big book. Either God is everything or God is nothing. The truth that they all realized is that all there is God. And another way of saying that is all there is consciousness. And an important thing of the realization is the realization that God and consciousness are synonymous. Those words mean the same thing. And before we get concerned now because we don't know what consciousness means, or before we get concerned because we think we do know what consciousness means, I'm talking about the consciousness that we all talk about when we say, I'm consciousness, I am consciousness. That consciousness, this consciousness, the consciousness that we all have, is the consciousness we're talking about. Another word for it that's used a lot is spirit, as in spiritual understanding, as in what we're talking about, spiritual consciousness. Spirit is the same as consciousness, and spirit is the same as God. These words are all synonymous, and with the great understanding of these rishis and sages has all been, the realization that they had is that all there is God. This is the fundamental mystical truth. And since we're all here for an introduction to spiritual, which is mystical consciousness, this is the truth we're talking about. What else do we say there? Well, we can probably all agree on one level of starting place. I think we would all agree that there is consciousness. And I think we would all agree that there is a creative principle of some sort. And I would think we would all be able to agree that there is a sustaining principle of some sort. And this is what they were talking about. And as part of our attempt not to use loaded words, I'm not going to refer to that as God through all this class. I'm just going to call it what is. We're going to talk about what is, what really is, all that is, what is. Joel used to call it the infinite invisible. That was his attempt to avoid terms that anybody thought they had any knowledge of what they meant. And I'm just going to call it what is, because none of you have a preconceived idea of what is means. And perhaps you can see now why we have to empty out all of our concepts about what God is. Because any concept we have is a concept within consciousness. And if God is consciousness, then anything that is within consciousness can't be God. And so our concepts can't be right, but they may be a limited description of some aspect, but they certainly are not a concept of God. So we'll talk about what is tonight. the principle that all there is what is, means that what is that creative principle that we talked about. What is the only creative principle. It's what created what is. And notice the fun thing there. What is created what is. But what is and what is are the same what is. What is consciousness created whatever it created out of itself, out of consciousness, and it's a creation in consciousness. And this is what the word spirit is trying to express. We talk about things being spirit, and God is spirit. The meaning of spirit is, well, undefined, of course, but an important aspect of being spirit or consciousness is being non-material, non-corporeal. What is created by what is created by the infinite invisible, is created in consciousness, of itself. And this is where the term Advaita, non-dual, comes from. Notice they don't even say single, they don't even say one, because the one implies not one, and they don't even allow that kind of duality. So they mean non-dual, which means they just say it's not two, but it's all there is. So this is difficult because words can't possibly express this. Just now you know what ineffable means, the inability to say what it is we're talking about, because anything we say is in consciousness and therefore can't be it. Lao Tzu said that. He who knows says not, he who says knows not. Same thing, it's indescribable. But we can talk about it, and we can point at it like the hand pointing at the moon. So we have creative principle, what is, creating a creation, and what it created is what is, of course, and this is all still in non-duality. This is all still oneness. And the nature of everything that created must therefore be the nature of the creator, of what is, because there was nothing else to create from, by the way. So we have this mystical, the problem with all of this is that we are dealing from a position of a human being, and we are dealing from a position which is a material concept, and we are dealing from a position of having 5 senses, material senses, and we are dealing from the position of thinking we have a finite mind, and so we can't grasp this clearly. And this, of course, is the primary reason that I've implored you not to get your intellect involved, because your intellect can't possibly grasp this. This has to be something that's understood way down here, that clicks with you, and that you get. And, of course, that probably won't happen tonight. It happens over years and years and years. It settles and settles and settles, and the little clicks happen, and you get a deeper and deeper understanding of what I'm trying to say, and the clarity grows. I remember sitting in front of a master for 3 years, and he kept talking and talking and talking, and I kept thinking, I wish he'd just say what he meant. I wish he'd just say, why won't he say what he meant? Why does he keep this double talk going? Why won't he say what he meant? And then I got a significant click. And the problem was that he was saying exactly what he meant. And I couldn't conceive of the fact that he meant what he said. And therefore I kept wishing he'd say what he meant. And what I really meant is I wish he'd say something I could understand. So that's the problem. And it's a slow process to let this settle in, that we've come for an introduction to spiritual consciousness. And the fundamental position in spiritual consciousness is that all there is God. And there are a lot of ramifications of that, which we'll discuss. It is, by the way, the one of the 2 or 3 really fundamental principles of the Infinite Way, which is Joel Goldsmith's teaching. My favorite thing about calling it what is that I just call it is for a nickname. Its nickname for me is. And it leads to the expression within me that has a lot of meaning for me is, I often find myself saying, ising. You know, which is God is being, not outside of time, but ising right now, in this eternal right now. And ising, you don't mind if I leave the what out, do you? Ising eternally and right now. And I believe we mentioned perhaps last week when we were talking about mind, that time and space are inside of mind, and mind is inside of consciousness. So notice that this puts ising outside of time, okay? And that's what eternal means. Eternal doesn't mean this very long stretch of time that didn't have a starting point and didn't have an ending point. Eternal means outside of time. Time is happening within eternal. Inside the bubble is time, but eternal is happening outside of time. And the only other thing that happens outside of time is now. Now is not in time. Time is that stretch to the past and that stretch to the future, and right now is here. So, ising right now. And Joel, who also almost used the word is, he used the word God in this particular case, but he said God is ising, and he said God is not wasing. God never was wasing. And then the one I love is he says, and God is also not willing, in spite of all of our expressions that God willing, I'm going to do this, God willing, I'm not. But you know, God is not willing. God is ising right now. And being outside of time, it makes it rather interesting to think about the concept of God is going to do something, or God should have done something, because those are timely considerations, and God is way outside of time. What's happening inside the bubble is timely, but God is outside of time. We'll use the word, I like the word harmonious quite a lot. Harmony is one of the characteristics of is. And, you know, we think about harmony as things getting along together. But when you think of things coexisting in eternity, outside of time, you get a real jump on what harmonious must mean. And I think of harmony as being in eternity, things coexisting without strife, without any difficulties, without anybody infringing on anybody, without anything going on at all, eternally. And this is the highest concept of harmony that I have realized so far. So ising harmoniously, eternally and harmoniously. The other words that we hear about God in Orthodox religions and in the metaphysical religions and in the mystical religions, consistently they all talk about God being omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. And usually they don't mean it, because then they pray to God to overcome other powers, which means that God isn't omnipotent. And they tell God a lot of things in their prayer, which means that they don't really believe that God is either omniscient or omnipresent, because obviously there are things God needs to be told. So there's a lot of questionable reliance on the three O's. But if we look at what that means mystically, it all makes perfectly clear sense. If God is consciousness, the consciousness, then everything which exists is within consciousness, is within God, is within the consciousness which is God. How is that for a definition of omniscient? Clearly God is aware of everything, because if God were not aware of it, it would not be in God consciousness, and therefore it wouldn't be. So omniscience really means the fact that everything is within God's consciousness. And omnipresence has almost the same meaning, because if everything is within God's consciousness, then God is clearly everywhere, whatever everywhere means. Remember, there's no space and there's no time, so everywhere is an interesting concept. But within the bubble, we like to think about everywhere. And clearly, God is as omnipresent as it is omniscient. And omnipotent becomes rather clear too. The only power is its consciousness. It's the consciousness in which God is creating whatever it is that God is creating. Or we can say in which what ising, or is creating what is. We can get a glimpse of what this means, perhaps by looking at our own dreams. Let's assume the material structure, the material world for a minute or two. I'm laying in bed, according to the story, and I've got this brain inside my head bone, and I've got this consciousness inside my brain, and this subconsciousness, and it needs to say something, express itself while I'm asleep. And so I have a dream. And this dream is a bubble within my consciousness in which time and space are created. The space inside my dream is space that isn't anywhere, and when I wake up, it never was. And the time in which my dream elapses may be hours within the 1 second that I was dreaming, and when I wake up, that time never was. And similarly, what's going on in that dream is exactly what I'm conscious of. I, the sleeper, I, the dreamer, am conscious of. Anything that I'm not conscious of is not in the dream. It doesn't exist. And similarly, I am everywhere in the dream, because I am seeing the entire content of my dream, what's in there, and certainly there are things that we may talk about in the dream that aren't there, but they're not there, which means they don't exist in the dream even. So clearly I am seeing everything that is in my dream. I'm dreaming it. It's in my consciousness. And omnipotence becomes rather clear here because there are all these people in my dream who look to the me in the dream as if they are autonomous and doing their own thing and making their own decisions and causing me grief or doing whatever they're doing, but I'm dreaming it. It's my subconscious that's generating the whole thing. Everything in the bubble of my dream is an effect of my consciousness. And perhaps if you play with dreams a bit, you can get some idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about consciousness creating a creation in consciousness, as I do when I dream. And the true nature of what is consciousness, as the true nature of everything in my dream is whatever dreams are made out of, is the consciousness that created that bubble. It's all just consciousness. And inside my dream, I think I'm seeing material things and wet things and hard things and real things and painful things and fast things and slow things and good and bad things. And yet it's nothing but consciousness. And inside reality, heavy word, inside reality is the creation, what is, of what is in consciousness, in spirit. Something just zipped through and so fast, I missed it. Yeah. It needs to be said, it will zip through again and pause. So maybe this gives us a starting place on dealing with the idea of all there is consciousness, or all there is spirit, or all there is God, or all there is what is being. One of the probably the second primary principle of the infinite way, which is also fallout of this where we're at right now, is that God is expressing itself, or what is expressing itself as individual being. This is the second understanding, and don't try to get your intellects around how the idea that how there can be only one and there can be individual beings, but it's all in spirit and it's all in consciousness, just like there were all those beings in my dream, except there weren't really all those beings in my dream. There was just consciousness in my dream with pictures. Oh, I know what I was going to comment on. In the Bible, it talks about the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, if you think about Word as idea, and you think about ideas out picturing in consciousness, maybe all that makes sense, what the Word is, and why they only talk about the Word, and they don't talk about the material creation. They talk about the Word was with God, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. You know, it's all, even back in Genesis, they're talking in terms of ideas. So it's ideas in consciousness that is the creation. So I was about to say the second principle of the infinite way is that God is expressed as individual being. And that as every individual being. And that means that God is expressed as these spiritual beings that we think we are, that in fact that we are, that are having this human experience. God is expressed as an infinity, God being infinite, as an infinity of individual expressions. So God is expressed as all the individual beings, it's expressed as all the human beings. What is expressed as what we see as plants, and what is expressed as what we see as animals, cats and dogs. Although I don't think this cat thinks that God is really expressed as that dog, but but what is expressed as animal, vegetable, and mineral. What is expressed as cockroaches. The reality of cockroaches, the reality which we conceive of as cockroaches, God is, creation is all infinitely complicated, infinitely varied expression of God in consciousness, apparently at all levels of what we would call of individual consciousness, from granite to people, levels of consciousness that include practically no consciousness, we assume, in the case of granite, more in plants, more in animals, more in higher animals, self-consciousness in certain animals and in people, the ability to dream in people, i.e. create just like God did, with an important exception which we'll get to in a while, next class. But the thing to hear is that everything, no matter what you think it looks like or what you conceive of it as, and don't forget we're seeing our concepts of things, not the expression of God. We're seeing the content of our own consciousness expressed, so we're seeing our concept of things. But everything which we are seeing our concept of is an expression of God. An eternal, harmonious expression of God, because God is expressing outside of the bubble. Trying to think of another way of saying that. I'll never understand how Joel can chatter on for 40 minutes on one point, and I find 3 sentences and that's about it, I'm very absolute and very terse. Let's see. A couple of more things we could say about that. One of the implications, of course, is that I am, and you all can say I am an expression of God. This thing which I call Lee or I is an expression of God. And in spite of the concept I have about materiality and five senses, and in spite of the limitations that I impose upon myself because of my concepts about myself as this human being, in spite of all those limitations, that has absolutely no effect on God's expression of itself individually as me and as you and as you and as you. And this perhaps might give us a little insight into the New Testament expression that God is closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Okay, God is me. God is you, not close to you, is you. And this is the true you now, not the concept. And the true substance of each of us spiritual beings, is God's substance, whatever that is. What is substance? Is substance. Is spirit. Is consciousness. Is whatever we can call that. When Joel says that God is the substance of all form, what he's really saying is that all form is an idea in consciousness. It's an imposition in consciousness. We keep running up against the human concept and the spiritual being. An important lead into the next class is that within our personal experience as limited concepts of the expression of us which God is, the amount of God that there is in my personal experience is the amount of God that I realize, which is to say, I am only consciousness of that which I am conscious of, which I think is a fairly unassailable position to take. You know, if I am not aware of it, then I am not conscious of it. So the amount of God there is in my experience is the amount of God that I'm conscious of. Okay? That's where some of the things that you've heard probably in some of the other classes and workshops is based. What I realize is the extent of my experience. So if I want my experience to be more godlike, I need to realize more. I need to realize God more. Realize what is more. Be more aware of what is. See, the habit I have of using God, the conditioned habit I have of using the word God, even though many of us, whenever I say God, I'm triggering the anthropomorphical thoughts or the Santa Claus, whatever thoughts we have that we're trying to empty out. And you see, mine's not empty yet either. It's hard not to use that word when you're talking about what is. But there's as much, I am aware of the harmony that is what is, to the extent that I'm aware of the presence of what is in my life, as distinct from this concept I have, this limited concept I have. There are a lot of words that are associated with God that we talk about in we can talk about a few of those right now. Well, let me throw this out first. There is one what is, because what is all there is, okay? And it's non-dual. There's only one what is. And there's only one consciousness. I'm conscious, and you're conscious, and he's conscious, and she's conscious. But we don't have consciousnesses. We are conscious. We are partaking in that one consciousness which is expressed as us. Okay, that's one of the implications of non-duality, of oneness. Now, another thing is I'm alive, and you're alive, and he's alive, and she's alive. We're all alive, but we tend to think of my life and your life and his life and her life, but there's only one life which we all partake of. There is the life that is expressing itself as my life and your life, as there is the consciousness which is expressing itself as my consciousness and your consciousness. So there is one consciousness, and there is one life, and there is one substance, idea, that we're all of. Any of these, we have, I think of my mind and your mind and his mind and her mind. But there is the mind, one mind, which we are all in contact with, partaking of, looking into, seeing, being influenced by. We're all in the one mind. There are not individual minds, and there is not, contrary to popular rumor, a human mind and a carnal mind and a divine mind and a this mind and a that mind. There is the one mind, which is conceived of by us individually as different concepts of mind, but there's just the one mind. All these things put an entirely different significance to everything. I hope you'll want to listen to these CDs lots of times and let this soak in. And also at the end of this class, I'm going to list a bunch of other things that you can listen to that will help you hear this lots of different ways, because we're talking about a whole different thing, a whole different way of thinking. But whoever asked, what do we do about having emptied out? I think we're getting an idea of what we're putting in if you've emptied out God, religion, and prayer. Well, let's talk just briefly about prayer. What is being eternal, eternally harmonious, and outside of time is clearly not influenceable. It did or does or is what it is. Did what it did is not right, and is doing, it is what it is, and that's done, or whatever the word is. You see, you have a lot of trouble with verbs when we're outside of time, but what is what is. And it is not influenceable because it's what it is. And all of the time and the attempts to influence are inside the bubble. And what is not withholding anything. What is can't withhold anything. What is what is. It is being. Ising. There's no withholding in ising, it's just ising. And it's not withholding anything, and it can't give anything. It has nothing to give. It is ising, and it is ising all of it. It is already, this entire infinite creation, it's already ising. So what is not withholding, nor is it able to give. It knows of nothing material, so it certainly can't provide anything material. It knows nothing of health and sickness. It is ising eternally, with no variations, so it can't grant health or withdraw health. It knows its eternal life, and so it can't take away life or give life. Think about the implications of that. Any prayer which is designed to influence God to do something that God is not doing right now, or is designed to influence God to is any way other than it is ising, is not a prayer to God, but is a prayer to a concept of God. And it can't be answered. Although, as we pointed out last week, prayer groups sometimes work in the mental arena, but not in the spiritual arena. God is ising. What is ising. And that is an eternal fact and is not influenceable. And that's the reason I get accused of being very absolute, but it sounds like a cold and barren thing to some people, and yet actually it is, the more we realize of it, the more bliss there is in our life. And I suspect the complete realization that these masters that I've mentioned had, I suspect that leaves one in a state of bliss, which certainly was the truth that Robert shared with us. See, the nature of what is the nature of God. And for those of you who listen to Robert's CDs, he uses the word swarupa sometimes as the true nature of things. And you can see now that the swarupa of everything is the same, is what is. The nature of everything is what is. And good. There appears to be a structure or an organization or a set of laws that determine what is, and we see these laws reflected in the way the universe works, the way planets, the way the law of gravity works, the way roses always show up on rose bushes, the way there are lots of things which are absolutely repeatable and not variable, and although there are things that we can do healings on, there are things that we can't change. We cannot move the tide 1 second. We cannot bring the sun up 1 second earlier. There are lots of apparent laws even in our concept of the universe, and that means that we're seeing, when we see laws like that we can't influence even through spiritual work, that means we're seeing a concept of something which has a law in what is, a corresponding law in what is. And the fact is that this law that is the nature of what is actually a level higher than love. Love, we always talk about God as love. Well, the love is the expression or the result of the fact that these laws are absolutely immutable and always true and absolutely impartial and can be totally relied on and result in perfect harmony, eternal perfect harmony. And this, when conceived of by this human concept, feels like love. And so I think Barbara taught that law is the next step above love.
Right.
And that's what that finally means to me. I didn't know what that meant. We're not talking about law like the Old Testament law of the Ten Commandments, and it says we went from law to grace with Jesus. We're not talking about that kind of law. We're talking about the eternal law that is the nature of God, that expresses as us and expresses as love. Close your eyes and feel right now and see what you can feel. Right here, right now, ising as each of us. The I am that I am aware of when I say I am is the one is. Jesus said, I and my Father are one. Okay? The is that I am is the is that is. A lot of short words around, aren't there? Is and as. So ising in this eternal now. And any time I want to be aware of the presence of God, all I need to do is be aware that I am, because that I am is the consciousness of God. Or I can be aware of my life, because that is the one life. It's not my life. It's life expressed as this life, but it's the one life. So any time I want to be aware of the presence of God, I can be aware of this consciousness that is here. I can be aware that I'm aware. And that awareness is what is. Robert called it pure awareness. Choiceless, effortless, pure awareness was an expression he used a lot. What is this awareness. Not to be confused with my body, which is one of the things that this awareness is aware of. Not to be confused with my mind, which this awareness is aware of. This awareness which I am is aware of. Right here, right now, ising. Cooking. It'll start to feel like joy bubbling up from way down inside and coming up for no reason at all except that it's just bubbling up. That's ising. Joy is a sure sign that ising as you. If you're feeling joy, ising. As the joyful individual. Feel the presence. This presence is the supply consciousness, and it's the healing consciousness, and it's the companionship consciousness, and it's the fulfilling consciousness. This consciousness, this presence is the fulfillment. The source of is fulfilling itself as this individual expression. This presence is that fulfillment. Not yet turned material by my concepts, just the potential. Thank you.